Today is Tuesday, October 15th, and today and yesterday I learned something that has really helped me with comparison and has really helped me trust the process, I guess. And that thing is that everybody has their own journey. So, let me explain. Basically, if you don't know, I've talked about this in a lot of my other videos, but if you don't know, I play softball, right? And I'm trying to just get really good, right? And it's very hard to not compare to other people, whether that be teammates or just random people that I know of, because it feels like I'm insecure about it because I have not been playing softball for that long. I've been playing baseball for a while, but I haven't been playing softball for that long. And so it's hard to not compare, even though I am on a different path and I am not where they're at. So, yeah, everyone is on their own journey. I know that it's possible for me to, be where they're at, or, some person I'm comparing myself to. I know it's possible for me to be where they're at, but I can't compare there's a quote that's you can't compare your level 1 to someone else's level 100. You can't do that. If you're going to compare against someone, you have to compare your level 1 to someone else's level 1. Everyone has their own path. So if I'm going to make it big, if I'm going to become a good softball player and become the kind of softball player that I want to become, if I'm going to get there, then I don't necessarily need to follow the exact same path that everyone else followed. Because everyone has their own journey, and even though they all have similar paths, we all have similar paths, but it's different for each person. And I can't worry about I can't compare myself to them because we're on different paths, we're on different journeys, we're on different levels, and it's just not a fair comparison. You're stacking yourself, you're stacking it against yourself worse than it needs to be. So yeah, that quote, "Comparison is a thief of joy," is just been very prevalent in my mind recently, especially in sports. Any performance-based thing, it's so hard to not compare. It's good to compare at times when it's either comparing yourself to someone who's really much better than you can see what things you need to improve on. But when it's someone who's either the same level as you or just a little bit better, you can't be comparing if you're going to compare, don't compare with the outcomes and the outputs. Compare the inputs. If you're going to compare the inputs instead of the outputs. Because when we compare the outputs, that's the comparison is the thief of joy thing. That is when we get too caught up with, I'm never going to be that good. They're judging me and I can't be there. That kind of thing. You can't, that's the kind of bad comparison when you compare your outputs and your results. But when you compare your inputs, then that is the kind of thing that you need to be, because the inputs are what you are changing. You can't control your outputs until you control your inputs. Your inputs directly control your outputs. So you can't compare your outputs if you have different inputs. Obviously if you have a different input, then you're going to have a different output. So don't compare your outputs, compare your inputs. When you're comparing yourself to someone, compare your routines, compare what they are working on, compare their process to your process, compare your systems, compare your technique or form or whatever thing you're comparing in. When you compare, don't compare the outputs, compare the inputs, because the inputs result the outputs. The outputs are a result of the inputs. You can't have those outputs unless you have those inputs. So if you want to have the same output that those people have, then do the same inputs that those people have. Now, in terms of sports, physical sports, just because you copy a certain input does not mean you're going to be at the same output. Just because I have the exact same daily routine as an MLB player does not mean I'm an MLB player. Obviously. Because, in physical things, every person is different. But this is why, I really think it's important to see, what are their daily routines? What are the systems that these people who are in a position you want to be in, what are their routines and systems and daily, structured, like their day, like what does that look like? Like look at day in the life videos, because it really helps you understand what are their inputs. Because if you see their output and you're like, I want to be like that, you have to also look at the inputs. You can't only look at the outputs. So that is what I learned today. Comparison of your outputs and your results is the thief of joy. I believe that is true. But comparison of the inputs is actually helpful, because you can actually compare your inputs, and that is something you can take action on. You can't take action on results. You can only take action on your inputs. So compare your inputs, copy your inputs, experiment with different people's inputs and see what works for you, especially in like physical things like sports, but also just in any other skill, physical or not. Just experiment with your inputs and find what works for you. And eventually you'll find that system, you'll find that routine where you get massive improvements and where you can eventually achieve those same outputs, because you compared and you copied and you experimented with the inputs. So this is another tool. Like I have mentioned various tools to use when you're like problem solving or trying to figure something out. One of them is using why, what, how. Another one is using like comparison and like a Venn diagram. And this next one is input, output, basically. Analyze the inputs and the outputs. And when you're analyzing them, or when you're comparing them, compare and analyze the inputs. Prioritize that over comparing and analyzing the outputs. Because you do need to compare your outputs, because if you didn't, then you wouldn't know that you wanted to have that output, right? So you need to do that at some point. And you need to analyze those outputs at some point. Because if you analyze the outputs, if you have the same inputs, or you have a good input, but you're still not having the same outputs, if you analyze the outputs, and that is what you can use for like adjustment and course correction, I think. I'm kind of just thinking out loud right now, but that makes sense to me. Like if you analyze the inputs, that sets your main path, but analyzing the outputs, like the smaller things, and analyzing and comparing the outputs helps you course correct and make sure that your inputs are actually valid. Because if you're doing a certain input and you're not getting the output that you like, then that shows that your input is not sufficient. So you need to change your input. So the output is kind of just like it's kind of like an evaluation. If you compare your outputs and they're still not like similar or where you want to be, then that means you still need to be changing something in your input. Or either you need to change your input, or you just need to wait and trust the process and wait for those results to show, because things take time. So that is what I have to say today. Just to recap, if you had to take away one action point, one point from this video, it would be to, at least at the beginning, don't compare the outputs, because that kind of comparison is a thief of joy, but compare your inputs, because your inputs are what result in those outputs. So if you want to achieve that output, then you have to change your input. So your action point is to change your inputs, experiment with your inputs, and that will help you move closer to those outputs that you desire. If you liked this video, then definitely hit the like button. If you want to see more videos just like this one, then definitely subscribe, because I am posting every single day daily insights talking about what I learned that day and how I'm trying to implement it into my life and how you guys can implement it into yours. So if you want to see those kinds of videos, then definitely subscribe. If you want to see a video that is specifically chosen for you, like YouTube specifically was like, this person wants to watch this video, then that's going to be in this corner right here. And check out my channel if you want to binge the rest of my What I Learned Today videos. And yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.